Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking a massive swing at one of the most intense subjects in global strategy, geopolitics.
And intense is the right word. The material we've gathered is pretty specialized, jumping from, deep philosophy straight into military strategy.
So our mission here is really to act as your guides, to pull out the fundamental ideas, the ones that shape global conflict.
Exactly. Geopolitics itself, the term was coined by a Swedish political scientist, Rudolf Gehlen.
And it's a very synthetic discipline, right? It kind of jams together geography, history, military strategy, culture. It's messy.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But the authors we're reading really insist on this point. While its status as a, let's say, classical science is debatable, it's incredibly effective in practice.
It gives you a framework.
A framework for why nations behave the way they do, linking their physical territory to, well, their civilizational destiny.
And running through all of this, there's one single overriding concept, a fundamental dualism.
Absolutely. Think of this as the main law of geopolitics, the clash between two primordial forces, land and sea.
So on one side, you have tellurocracy, land power.
Right, associated with Eurasia, the heartland. And on the other, you have thalassocracy, or sea power. That's the Atlantic, the Anglo-Saxon world.
It's funny, the language immediately sounds more like mythology than political science.
I think that's the point. The sources frame this as something ancient, something primal.
Okay, let's break this down then. This central dualism. What defines the spirit, or the nomos, as the sources call it, of each power?
Well, the contrast is total. Land is defined by firmness, stability, fixed paths. The nomos of the earth, it leans toward hierarchy, tradition, inherited law.
And the sea, by its very nature, is the opposite of firm.
Precisely. The nomos of the sea, which was historically realized by England and then later the U.S., is all about impermanence, change.
So a sea existence, as they put it, actually transforms consciousness.
That's the argument. Legal and ethical norms, they become fluid. In essence, you replace settled, inherited law with constantly adapting procedural rules. It's restless.
And here is where the argument gets really provocative, Nay. The sources link this shift directly to the Industrial Revolution.
They do. This view holds that the industrial breakthrough only happened in 18th century England because this marine existence made it easier to make technical discoveries.
So the fluidity of the sea freed up technology from the constraints of, traditional land societies.
Exactly. It emancipated technical progress from those heavy, stable, traditional structures.
But wait, if the sea nomos enables technological progress, doesn't that suggest that the land nomos, based on hierarchy and stability, is just fundamentally anti-modern? How do they even square that?
They don't try to square it. They embrace it as the core tension. They even map it onto what they call a sacred geography.
With East versus West.
Right. The East is the ontological plus spirit contemplation tradition.
And ontological plus, just to be clear, that implies something rooted in, fundamental reality, being itself.
Yeah. And the material summarizes this with a Russian phrase, nothing, which implies a sort of resignation to the spiritual over the material.
And the West, then, must be the opposite.
The ontological minus. Decline, degradation, commercial civilization. Its essence is constant action, which they summarize with the American phrase, go ahead.
So it's framed as a clash between spirit and commerce.
And that philosophical war translates directly into a geopolitical choice. The sources argue that for the Eurasian spaces of the former USSR, there are only two paths.
Integrate with the rich North, which is the West.
Or slide into the poor South, becoming part of the Third World. It's a zero-sum civilizational choice, basically determined by your geography.
Which brings us to the strategists who actually tried to map this metaphysical conflict onto the real world.
Yeah, the ones who drew the lines on the map.
Let's start with the thinkers representing sea power.
Okay, so the Atlanticist view from the very beginning was about planetary dominance. You have the American admiral, Alfred Mahan.
And his whole thing was that America's destiny was to be the world's leading maritime power.
And that it had to cooperate with the British fleet to do it. He fundamentally believed sea power was just a better, most effective form of civilization.
Then you get his contemporary, Halford Mackinder, who gives us the map that really defines this whole conversation.
Mackinder's world island, Europe, Asia, and Africa. And he breaks it into three zones.
You have the middle, the innermost heartland.
Which is geographically Russia.
Yeah.
Then surrounding that, you have the inner crescent or rimland, the coastal zones.
And finally, the outer crescent, which is us, the Anglo-Saxon world.
And his core thesis, his strategic manual for the Atlantic powers was what?
Prevent a unified continental bloc. At all costs.
Specifically, preventing a union between the heartland and the inner crescent. His laser focus was on stopping Russia and Germany from ever forming an alliance.
And that becomes the great obsession of Anglo-Saxon foreign policy for the next century.
So what was the definitive land power response to that threat?
That came from the German geopolitician Karl Haushofer. His doctrine was the direct answer to Mackinder.
And what was his big idea?
A massive continental counter-alliance. The Berlin-Moscow-Tokyo axis. The continental bloc.
And the sources are really clear on this next point, which is crucial.
That Haushofer's strategic vision was completely betrayed by Hitler.
Totally. Hitler chose to attack the USSR, which was the exact opposite of what Haushofer's geographical logic demanded. It was a failure of ideology overriding strategy.
Right. So let's look at how this Atlanticist strategy actually plays out on the ground today. How sea power maintains control.
Two key methods. First is the anaconda policy.
Just like it sounds.
Picture a giant snake. The U.S. system encircling the Eurasian landmass, strangling the Old World by controlling its vital coastal areas and access to warm seas.
The goal being to control the choke points, so the land power is dependent on maritime trade, which the sea power controls.
Precisely. And the second method is, it's particularly visible in Eastern Europe.
The cordon sanitaire.
Cordon sanitaire. It's a tactical belt of smaller, politically weaker, and often antagonistic states placed right between Russia and Germany.
The two powers Mackinder was most afraid of unifying.
And the sources argue that the independence of these states is, quote, de facto impossible. They're forced to rely on a distant third power for security.
The U.S.
The U.S., which keeps the continental powers fractured.
So this raises the big question. If that's the sea's strategy, what do the sources say the Eurasian heartland should do in response?
The Neo-Eurasian strategy calls for, aggressive counter-integration, building their own alliances to break the encirclement.
Let's start with the Western axis, which targets that cordon sanitaire.
That's the Moscow-Berlin axis. The idea is to eliminate the cordon sanitaire by jointly deciding on geopolitical boundaries in Eastern Europe.
And crucially, excluding Atlanticist intervention.
Strictly excluding it. But the sources are careful here. They say Germany's dominance must be geopolitical, about continental stability, not, racial or ethnic expansionism.
Okay, and then to cut the anaconda in the south.
The southern axis, Moscow-Tehran. This is called the backbone of the whole Eurasian project.
What of here?
Its objective is to cut the anaconda at the Persian Gulf, which the material calls the Achilles heel of the Old World. It's about north-south integration, locking down that flank.
And that leaves the east.
The eastern axis is Moscow-Tokyo. Japan is seen as this ideal anti-Western partner because of its position and its traditionalist values.
So the goal is a new Pan-Asian project to push the U.S. out of the Pacific.
And complete the bloc Haushofer envisioned.
And internally, what does this new Eurasian empire look like? It's not just the old Soviet Union again.
No, absolutely not. The goal is a new Eurasian empire, but explicitly not a state nation.
Meaning?
It combines strong political centralism with a really flexible, decentralized system of regional economies. They call it a third-way economy. The idea is to maximize internal self-sufficiency.
So it's independent of that external maritime economic control.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have this deep, centuries-long conflict. What does this all mean for the contemporary world after the Cold War?
Well, the sources say the victory of Atlanticism led to two competing scenarios for the future.
The first one is mondialism.
Right. Think Francis Fukuyama's End of History. Total planetary integration. A single world of market and democracy. In that future, the dualism is just canceled. It's over.
But not everyone agrees it's over.
Not at all. The alternative is neo-Atlanticism, which is
Right.
associated more with Samuel Huntington. It says the dualism is absolutely ongoing.
The West and the rest.
The West and the rest. And it requires the West to consolidate and maintain its dominance against new civilizational blocs. Slavic Orthodox, Islamic, Confucian. The conflict just shifts battle lines.
It's just relentless. I want to end on a thought related to the source's philosophical framing of war. They describe the partisan, the irregular fighter, tied to the soil as restoring the seriousness of war.
As opposed to a conventional game-like military contest.
Right. And the ultimate tension is whether this land-sea conflict is just a static, cyclical thing that goes on forever, or if it's a true, dramatic historical dialectic, a confrontation that demands a unique answer.
And that question brings us right back to the beginning. The sources said the Industrial Revolution was the sea's unleashed technique.
Emancipated by that fluid nomos.
So the final challenge they articulate isn't really about conquering territory. It's about conquering that technical impulse itself. So the question we'll leave you, the learner, with is this. What would it take for a modern power, or as the text suggests, a new Hercules, to successfully tame that unleashed technology in a way that finally resolves this centuries-long conflict between land and sea?